Well, I was born in Mount Kisco. My brother Ben, who had been 6 years older than me, went to Princeton graduate school, and he was a radio announcer at WTTM in Trenton. So the idea of the entertainment world entered my mind through my older brother Ben. Radio was still going hot and heavy. So that was how it all started, and from there, of course, television came into being. And I sent out 200-300 resumes trying to get a job, and nobody would hire me, but I got one guy who did respond by the name of Hugh Owen. And Hugh was the vice president in charge of sales for Paramount Pictures in the old Paramount building on 1501 Broadway, where their headquarters was. And I went into his office. It was huge, half the size of a football stadium, and all the Hollywood glory you could imagine. And he hired me as a Booker trainee, and I said, oh boy, I've got it made. I'm going to Hollywood. You know, here I am. And sure enough, I reported to work on Monday morning. I went to 10th Avenue. I went into an old decrepit building that was the local exchange for Paramount Pictures, where they shipped all the tape films out in those days to the theaters around the New York metropolitan area. And my job was to make hash marks in a book, making notes of all the theaters that were carrying a particular picture. And I must say, after 6 months, I was so scintillated by the job. It was so exciting. And I was so thrilled about it that I got fired. Most boring job I ever had. Got a job with Guild Films, and Guild Films at the time was a distributor of television programs. Rube Kaufman was the president, and I got hired as a junior salesman. There was 2 shows that Guild Films had. Life with Elizabeth, which had Betty White as the star. It was Betty White's first television program, and I sold the Peel's beer in Boston, Philadelphia, and New York. So I sold the first television show Betty White was ever in, and she's still going strong, and I'm rather amused when I see her looking as sprightly as she does and acting as she does nowadays. And the other film was an unknown guy who was a piano player who nobody would believe in, no matter how hard I tried up and down Madison Avenue, by the name of Liberace. I know I had a hit on my hands when Liberace, I took a can of film up to the Bronx somewhere for an old ladies' home. And they saw Liberace, and my God, the women clapped and cried and laughed and were so thrilled and excited. I said, holy God, this guy really does appeal to women. I remember going to the editor of Look magazine, the menswear section, saying, I think you ought to do a feature on Liberace. He's going to be a big star in television. I think a feature with him would be of great interest to your public. Turned me down. 6 months later, Liberace made the cover of Look magazine, and that was the first sale of Liberace outside of Los Angeles, where he was locally playing in the country. After I left Guild Films, I went to a company called Station Distributors. And here again, I did the impossible. We had a show called Norman Spear's Football Forecast. And Norman Spear predicted what football teams on Saturday were going to win and lose. And this was something that I took and I sold to DuPont. It was the first television forecast show on weekly ever on television. It was the first. And now, of course, there are scads of television shows predicting all kinds of teams are going to win, lose, and so on. But this was the first. And then I went to work for NBC. And there I sold Today, Home Tonight. We had Dave Garroway on Today. We had on the Today Home show, we had Arlene Francis, which was on 11 to 12 every day. And a guy by the name of Hugh Downs, who was the announcer. And he was a great guy, and I used to bring Hugh the commercials to pitch that I had sold the advertisers to. Then in the evening, there was Steve Allen, and we were the first group to sell participations. In other words, in those days, shows were sold to advertisers, and advertisers picked the time period that they wanted their show to go into. And we sold participations so that we could have many advertisers in a show of a different kind. And we were the pioneers in that field. I'll never forget the first time I went to the Steve Allen show. I'd just been hired by NBC, and a funny thing happened. I didn't realize that there's a green room, and that's where the salesmen and executives and advertisers go to watch the show. I sat right in the audience. And who comes up the aisle doing interviews of all the people in the audience? Steve Allen. He stops at my row, and I'm in the third person in, or the fourth person. He gets to the first person on the end, then he goes to the second person next to that person, and then he goes to the third person, and I'm dying a million deaths saying, what am I going to say? My God, I just started at NBC. What am I going to tell him? Thank God he stopped and never got to me. And wow, what a relief. I never forgot that experience. It was quite something. While I was at NBC, I went to the Metropolitan Opera, and I saw an opera booth called La Pericole, and I fell in love with the opera. And I said, this is fabulous. This belongs on Broadway. And I met with Rudolph Bing, who was the head of the Metropolitan Opera Company at the time. He was the real king of opera, and met with him and got the rights to move La Pericole to Broadway. And my next job then was to, well, am I going to get the star in it? Well, Cyril Ritchard was starring and directed it at the Met. And I met with Cyril, and I walked in, he says, "My, you're terribly young. I thought you were an older man." I was just a kid. So Cyril, of course, was thrilled to do the La Pericole. And I made one phone call, and it's amazing how one phone call can change one's life. I called up Moss Hart. Moss Hart was the king of Broadway at the time. He had just directed and written My Fair Lady, which was the ultimate biggest hit of all time. And I called up Moss Hart, and I said, "Mr. Hart, I have La Pericole, which I'd love to bring to Broadway, and I'd love to have you do the book." And he said, "I'd love to do the book if I can direct." And I said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Hart. Cyril Ritchard is directing." Now, had I had the sense and the smarts then that I have now, I would have said, "Mr. Hart, we'd love to have you direct, of course." And gone to Cyril Ritchard and said, "Cyril, guess what? We've got Moss Hart, so not only going to do the book, he's going to direct it, and we'll get the financing, and we'll go beyond Broadway with the show." It's like going to Steven Spielberg right today in movies and say, "I've got a script I'd love you to do," and Spielberg says, "Yes, I can direct it," and you're saying, "I'm sorry, Mr. Spielberg, I have so-and-so directing." And Hart was even bigger by far than what Spielberg was in the world of Broadway. He was the ultimate name in Broadway. And so that one phone call, I said, "Of course you could direct, Mr. Hart," I would have gone on to work in Broadway. I never would have gone into television in all probability, and I would have been a Broadway producer. That's where my career would have taken me. Finally, I got a job with Ziv, where as a salesman. I went to Providence, and as a matter of fact, in those days, they said, "Go see the guy that owns the business, see the president." So there was a car dealer, Smokey Stover, in Providence. And I went to see him a number of times, trying to convince him to buy King of Diamonds with Brod Crawford. And he said, "You come around here one more time, use SOB," and he pulls out a gun. He said, "This gun, I'm going to blow your brains out. Don't you show your face up around here ever again." I was scared. I left, and I said, "Oh boy, I'm never going back here again." And I spent 2 months in Providence trying to sell a show. Couldn't do it, and got fired from Ziv. And then I went to work for the Rather Corporation. They started a division called Telesyn, and they had Lassie, the Lone Ranger, and Sergeant Preston. And I said, "Listen, give me $75 a week. That's all I want. No strain on you, no strain on me." In the meantime, he had hired a dozen other guys at $1,000 a week, real torpedoes. And they got nowhere. Guess what? I ended up selling the Lone Ranger to the WABC in New York for I think it was $400,000 or $500,000, which was a huge amount of money in those days. And I got my commissions, and I was always in the black, and I ended up selling after 3 years. I became senior vice president in charge of sales, and I sold double personally what 13 other salesmen did combined. I was a threat. I was so successful, I wanted to become president of Telesyn. I felt, here I'm making all the sales, bringing all the money, and the guy who was the president smoking cigars all day, sitting behind a desk doing nothing. I wanted to become president. Well, I was making waves, and his boss, who was a senior vice president corporate of the Rather Corporation, whom he reported to, felt a little uncomfortable about it, and they said, we got to get rid of this guy. And he called me from New York and made an appointment with him. He said, I'm sorry, we got to let you go. So I swore, I said, I'll never work for a company again as long as I live. I'm going in business for myself. And that's when I started Sandy Frank Films program sales. So I said, well, how do I get started? I called television stations around the country to see if they had local programs that might be syndicated. There was a station out in San Jose called KNTV and a show called Buckaroo 500. A guy had a horse by the name of Dixie, and Buck was dressed like a cowboy. And we bartered that all across the country on many stations. And that was the first show that I sold when I started my company. Turns out Buck was Buck had been an ex-jailbird. Buck Weaver, the guy who was, the whole premise of the show was say your prayers every day, do your schoolwork, wash behind your ears, and all these wonderful things to kids. And he'd been an ex-jailbird, which I did not know at the time, the ironies of all things. And there was another show that I got the rights to over the telephone. There was a show called You Asked For It, and just by looking through the TV guide at the time, there was a TV book at the time that listed all the production companies and distributors. It was listed a guy by the name of Mark Lipsky under You Asked For It. Ready Whip, he owned Ready Whip. I called him out of the blue. I got him on the phone. I said, listen, I'd like to distribute You Asked For It. He's okay, go ahead. You go ahead and I'll do a deal with you. I said, I'll give you a 35% commission. You go ahead and sell it. And just like that. And I sold the hell out of that show. And then I got the right to Bill Cosby. I sold Bill Cosby's first network show. I gambled. I guaranteed $1 million to the Million Morris office. $1 million in 1970. I didn't have $1 million, but I guaranteed that I would deliver $1 million to Bill Cosby as a guarantee for the right to sell his first network show, which he was a school teacher. And this was on NBC. He was on 8 to 8:30. But I took risks. I was competing with the major studios. And in those days, the major studios had all their off-network shows and controlled all the time periods in the afternoon, and the networks controlled 7 to 11 at night, so there was really very few time periods available for an independent to sell a show in. But then the prime access rule came about, and the prime access rule broke up the 3 network funnels. It cleared 7 to 8 and made it local time from network time. The FCC ruled in order to increase production and diversity of production and independent production, the networks were removed from 7 to 11 and they were only allowed to program 8 to 11. So I had 7 to 8 Monday through Saturday and then to sell programs. And it freed up a world for me. And suddenly, I got the rights to a show called Parent Game, which Chuck Barris produced. And I sold that thing in about 180 markets. It was a record of all time to break all records in the syndication when the prime access rule came about. Our company was the first company in television to have 3 shows on in prime access, meaning between 7 and 8 Monday through Saturday during the same season. I had named that tune, I had Bobby Vinton, and I had Treasure Hunt. 3 shows on the same season in prime access. Mind you, my competitors were Fox, Paramount, all the major studios, Viacom. The most they had on was 2. I had them beat as an independent. In 1973, I got the rights to Name That Tune from Harry Salter, the founder of Name That Tune, which was on in the 50s on CBS, 7:30 to 8 Friday night. It was on for 4 years. It went off with the quiz scandal in 1960. And Name That Tune was a show that I did with Ralph Edwards, who was a host and producer of Truth or Consequences and was a very well-known personality, television personality. And we did that for 9 years together. And then in 1986, or rather 1985, I did Name That Tune on my own, produced it, did 160 half hours, and sold it all over the country.
Whoever names the next tune, or scores the next tune, I should say, is going to win. Bid a note in the 10 points.
There was a show that was offered me that I turned down by Barris, which was a big mistake. It was called The Gong Show. I didn't want to take a show where Chuck had performed, people come on who were civilians, and do silly shticks. And I didn't want to do a show that made fun of people, so I turned the show down. I let my personal feelings interfere in what should have been a business decision. Anyway, I did You Asked For It in the early 80s, but I did 300 half hours at a cost of close to $30 million. I was determined to make a network quality show. I had Rich Little as host and Jack Smith as co-host.
Welcome to what I believe to be one of the most fascinating shows on television. Fascinating because it's your show.
And we did a total of 300 half hours, 150 each year, and it cost us $30 million. I mean, it was just as big a gamble as anybody could ever dream of taking. And I did. And I was fearless. These King brothers had a show called Wheel of Fortune. The oldest King brother got it through sitting at a bar with Merv Griffin's president, and ended up getting the show, which had been a failure on NBC in daytime, and Name That Tune was a hit. So I was so fed up with the job that Columbia Pictures did in producing Lie Detector. Columbia just put it through the pipeline and wouldn't listen to me, and the show died a horrible death. And the most valuable thing in prime access are time periods. If you get time periods for your show, you control the world. And that's what I handed over to the King world when I decided to abandon Lie Detector after 39 weeks and let stations off, took out of their 52-week contract. And instead of coming in with Name That Tune and saying, hey guys, I got a great show for you called Name That Tune and replace Lie Detector, it's a proven hit, which it had been for many years as a once-a-week show in prime access, 7 to 8 for 9 years. I could have come in with Name That Tune and replaced Lie Detector, and the station would have gobbled it up, and Wheel of Fortune never would have had any time periods that were halfway decent to be on. But I was so turned off and so down as a result of the fact that Columbia did such a lousy job, I couldn't bring myself to come back to the stations and offer another show. I was at MIP in Cannes in France. I dropped my card on a table at a booth, Sandy Frank, which I had my secretary do at all the booths just with my card. And sure enough, a month later, I get a letter from a Japanese company saying we have a show called Gatchaman, an animated series. Would you like to see it? It's been on in Japan for 13 years and has been a big hit. So I said, hell, send it to me. So they send me Gatchaman. I look at it, and I said, my God, it's like Star Wars. And I sold it as an animated Star Wars. I took the Japanese series and reversioned it. We redid the scripts, we did new animation, we got Hoyt Curtin to do the music, a 40-piece orchestra to do the music. We completely redid the show, re-edited it and everything using the basic footage, but giving new storylines to the footage, and completely redid the series and renamed Gatchaman into Battle of the Planets, and that's how that came about. And that cost me $5 million in 1978. I didn't have one sale, and I committed to $5 million, and sure enough, I ended up making my first sale. Metro Media, Dick Woolen bought it for $2.5 million. Then I sold Kaiser Broadcasting. They had a group of stations, and I got something like $1 million there, and I was off to the races. I was off the hook. But boy, it was a risk. Had I not sold Metro Media and not sold Kaiser, how I'd ever gotten that $5 million, I'll never know. But here again, I had so much confidence in my ability to sell, it never dawned on me that I wasn't going to be successful.
This is my Battle of the Planets, my Japanese, yes?
Because of my success with Battle of the Planets, I was known in Japan, and we managed to get the rights to some of those films. Then I got some rights. I went to Russia and got rights to some of the films from Russia. The feature film area was a very marginal area for me because I was in the business of selling television series, and selling features and television series, two totally different things. And the features didn't interest me, quite frankly. Series did, coming out with a brand new show every year to sell in prime access. I got the rights to Menachem Begin's book, The Revolt. At the time, Menachem Begin became elected Prime Minister of Israel in 1977, which was very historic. As a result of that, made a deal with the William Morris Agency, who pursued me. Sammy Weisbord, the president of the William Morris Agency, pursued me and said, on my mother's grave, I promise you I will sell Menachem Begin as a movie, and it will be produced. And then Fred Silverman killed it, said, let's go to script. After Pierce okayed it as a movie, and he was the president of ABC. So the Begin movie never happened. But Sadat, not to be outdone by Begin, after the Begin-Sadat 79 Camp David meeting, Sammy Weisbord said, she said, Sandy, and I said, you know, I want to get the rights to Sadat. What do you think? He's absolutely go after it. He said, you'll have the greatest experiences you'll ever have in the Middle East if you, in your life, by going and getting the rights to Sadat's life and Begin's. And Sadat had me do something which, frankly, is unbelievable. I'm the only person to ever address the Egyptian nation. What happened was Sadat, who I spent an afternoon with in his country home in the Barrage, after several hours, we really hit it off. And he liked me a lot. I told him my father lived in Cairo, I lived in Alexandria, and I listened to Egyptian records as a kid, and he really took a shine to me, and we spent several hours together. And I told him, the Minister of Culture who was with me, I said, my God, he could be assassinated. There's only 3 soldiers guarding his country home. He says, don't worry, Allah will look after him. And I said to myself, oy vey, Allah is going to look after him. God forbid. Anyway, he was subsequently assassinated. But I got the rights to Sadat's life. Sadat had me, through the Minister of Culture, make a speech announcing that I'd gotten the rights to make a movie of his life story. So I called my producer in Hollywood and writer David Levy, and we crafted an 8-minute speech that I was going to give over Egyptian television. So I went into a studio, taped an 8-minute speech, had no idea when it was ever going to be on the air in Egypt.
As I witnessed this great leader standing in the Knesset, yearning for peace, I felt a strong inner determination, which made me resolve on the spot to do my part in dramatizing for American and world television President Sadat's historic and unprecedented initiative.
And sure enough, I'm in my room in the Mina House, which is the top hotel in Giza outside the pyramids. I'm in my room at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. And sure enough, my 8-minute speech comes on the air. Here I am addressing the Egyptian nation with Egyptian voiceover. There was only one network in Egypt. It was a government station. 9 o'clock, the highest sets in use time period, Saturday night at 9. The whole nation's watching television. And there I'm making a speech about Sadat's life story of the movie we're going to make. And nobody has ever addressed the Egyptian nation before then or since then. And here I'm Jewish, and here I'm addressing the Egyptian nation. To me, it was just a kind of a lark, a robot and a human looking at old movies of all kinds. It was nothing I took seriously, and it was nothing that I had any great pride in, per se, as an achievement of mine or as an accomplishment of any note. And it was fine. It was not a big deal in my career or with me. It was, you know, for what it was cute, and it was fun, and it was a lark, and it was okay. And they seemed to develop into a cult kind of a thing, which is fine if that's, as has Battle of the Planets, incidentally. No, I'm proud of the fact that going back to the 50s, that the shows that I sold were the first in football and selling participations, and my efforts and by saying no to Moss Hart. I mean, you know, I look back. No, my achievements in selling Lassie, Sergeant Preston, Lone Ranger, my own business, selling You Asked For It and getting the rights, Name That Tune, and all the shows that I've since done, the Bobby Vinton Show. I mean, I'm very proud, Face the Music. And of course, 60 Minutes did a piece on me as part of the NATPE convention they covered, and they made me the single centerpiece. And of course, Morley Saber said, how do you account for your success in selling? And Morley Saber standing right in front of me. I said, because I go for the jugular. I went for his jugular, and he backed up. He panicked. I mean, the funniest damn reaction you ever could see. So I've had a lot of fun moments over the years, and I'm looking forward to many more fun moments and productive moments and profitable moments in the years to come.